I'll do a brief introduction of these three fine folks here. I've had the privilege of working with each of them in a variety of different ways over the last few years. And we'll talk about a variety of things here. And really, we're looking to have a great dialogue with everybody. And if there's questions along the way, by all means, we'll answer them. But we're going to dig into a few things. We'll certainly address methane specifically, but really it fits into a broader picture around responsible energy development, ambition towards net zero. Those are the things that I think we all see are getting a lot of attention. Oftentimes we hear different definitions of what that actually means. And so we'll work within the confines of the generalities, so to speak, but we'll have some pretty good insight. So Janet Annesley, Chief Sustainability Officer with Kiwetinohk Energy. She can tell you a little bit about the organization, but certainly a lot of great ambition there and some really great case studies and strategic approach to energy development in Canada. Connor O'Shea, I don't know, yeah, hey, that's about what you hear in the world right now around Connor and his organization, Westgen Technologies. Great story, clean tech development. Hopefully Connor can touch a little bit around his evolution as an individual and business leader in that space and where it's led him now. And Kirstie Boyle, who probably the one we've only, just met in person, although we have been speaking with each other quite a bit over the last couple of years. A relatively new CEO with Envirosoft Corporation, one of the data management firms related specifically around GHG, environmental asset management in the sector. Great organization. I've known them for probably about 14 years now. But maybe we'll leave it at that, and we can get into the discussion a little bit after maybe each of you connects a little bit to your organization, what we're talking about here today. Why methane? Sure, but where does it fit in the broader responsible energy development? And we'll start with you, Kirstie, and then we'll come backwards.
Sounds good. Hello, everyone. Really excited to be part of this conference. We were just talking backstage there about how these types of conferences that bring lots of innovators together to talk high level and to really talk at an ambitious scale, it's energizing to be a part of. So excited for this discussion today. Envirosoft that Jackson introduced, we are the leading provider of emissions quantification and reporting software for the energy industry. And so what gets measured gets improved, and a lot of the data underlying a lot of these discussions, that's our wheelhouse.
Sorry. So Connor O'Shea, CEO and co-founder of Westgen Technologies. Our kind of how we fit in this equation is Westgen has developed some power generation technology that helps oil and gas producers and others eliminate methane emissions on their well sites. And so we're a 3.5-year-old startup and scaling up with the support of a lot of people in the community here, and excited to be part of the conversation today.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Janet Annesley with Kiwetinohk Energy, and we are an energy transition company. And as far as we can figure, we're one of the only ones out there. We produce oil and gas from a variety of assets that we acquired, some from Ovintiv, some from a company called Distinction Energy. We consolidated those last year. And this January, we listed on the Toronto Stock Exchange. We also have 7 power projects in our green energy group, 850 megawatts of solar, some natural gas peaker projects, and natural gas co-fired electrical generation that we're going to equip with CCUS. That's our vision. And we are also looking more broadly to really work on a circular model, creating industrial hubs where we can use the variety of byproducts, including CO2, from our power plants and from our operations, and generate a whole stream of other value-added products In fact, today we were talking with a company that wants to use methane to make protein. That's pretty exciting.
Thanks, Janet. You know, it's what gets me excited about this type of conversation, but also the businesses that each of you are operating in the space that we're in energy development here in Canada, is there's a lot to get excited about. The development of technology and the innovative thinking that goes into use of waste product, et cetera. And, you know, so as much as we can anchor on methane, because there are multiple different uses for methane, some technology solutions obviously along the way, and data matters at every turn. But it's the creativity in innovators, whether it's an organization or individuals, that ultimately drive so much change. So, however, they're not the only ones that drive change. So, you know, I'm sure everybody can reflect a little bit on why has Canada been successful in responsible energy development, notably in the natural gas sector. Let's stick with that. But, you know, a lot of you here might start thinking about a broader system. We have a regulatory landscape that's been anchored around certain policy positions, whether it's federally or provincially. We have a carbon pricing. We have a carbon market. We have government funding that has gone to programs to collect better data, R&D, et cetera. We're starting to see more capital flow into clean tech development here, and Connor can attest to that. But are there pieces that you guys see that stick out the most for what have been drivers in Canada for whether it's methane mitigation, whether it's responsible energy development? You know, I kind of look at the whole system, but I would love to hear what each of you kind of think. And maybe, Connor, we can start with you.
Sure. I'll answer the question from the perspective of the service provider. So it's actually it's part of our founding story, I think, is part of the reason here. And so Canada's had more progressive regulations around methane emissions and other things than other jurisdictions. And it's actually going back to 2018, myself and my co-founder were saying, hey, we'd like to start a business together. What should we do? And one of the things that was on his list was these methane emissions, which he had, you know, come across in his career and thought, you know, that doesn't really seem right. Maybe there's a better way. And then that was on the list. And in 2018, the Alberta Energy Regulator, they changed Directive 60, and it said by 2022, you're not going to be allowed to build sites that do that anymore. And so that's what gave us the kick in the pants to say, hey, the industry is going to need something here. You know, can we solve this problem? And got us really focused on solving the problem. And then, you know, we were very fortunate that we found a solution. And I feel very fortunate that Canada has been positioned as a leader on this file, because, you know, we found a solution before somebody in the United States or somebody in Europe or somebody in Australia. And as a result of that, we've got this tremendous opportunity to grow our business and export our solution internationally. So I would say it's a combination of a progressive population that has been focused on responsible energy development for longer than it's been fashionable. And I think that's what got us to this place where we're leaders today.
So, Janet, with what's been the motivator for your business model as an organization, and really what's incentivizing your decision making around capital allocation and how you want to grow the business?
Well, we're just out to prove that you can do the energy transition and you can do it commercially, that you can be profitable and sustainable. And obviously, to be sustainable, you need to be profitable. And I think, you know, Connor's comments really just nailed it, that, you know, at a high level, we've got government leading a change. Prior to working at Kiwetinohk, I was once upon a time Chief of Staff to the Minister of Natural Resources when Environment and Climate Change Canada put in the methane regulations at first, and a stream of people through the office saying, we just can't do this, we just can't do this, we can't do this leak detection and repair, it's just impossible. Guess what? We did it. And I think the industry is committed to that excellence. The government came along with very supportive programs. Now we're seeing a lot of resonance in the market. A lot of people will simply not invest. If you can attract capital as an oil and gas company, you really do have to have that excellence and be able to demonstrate through data that you have that excellence.
Thanks, Janet. And Kirstie, for you guys, I think as, data management firm, virtually every driver in the system leads people back to you. But is there something that sticks out more? Is it the regulatory environment? Is it folks looking to manage carbon assets? Is there anything that sticks out to you?
Yeah, I would say twofold. For us, we've been around for 20 years, and so we've got long-term partnerships with the majority of medium to large-size oil and gas operators, upstream and midstream. So we've really been with them along the entire journey from 20 years ago, 10 years ago, where it was just more so filling out forms for the government to do some disclosures around emissions, to seeing a massive change in the last 5 years, the energy around emissions reduction and the adoption kind of at the core of our clients' strategy. So seeing that entire path, I think there's been the two sides of the drivers. There's the regulatory. I think in Canada, when we compare to other jurisdictions, we've got a sister company in Norway, and the operating environment's quite different. The Canadian regulatory environment, there's many different regulatory bodies at provincial and federal levels, and each of them are introducing new regulatory changes at a incredibly fast pace. It's very dynamic. It's unlike anywhere else in the world in terms of keeping up to date with it. And I think the oil and gas industry and energy industry is doing a great job keeping up, and so that's been a big driver. I would say the second that we've really noticed, even with our smaller companies that maybe were slower to make these changes or to really weave it into the DNA of their companies, they're finding that it's a competitive advantage for them. So the markets are really rewarding them. There was one client we've been working with this last year where they just for the first time set emissions reduction targets, and the financial institutions have rewarded them with much lower interest rates and higher capital allocation, and not just as a one-time thing. So they have to actually commit to reporting on it but not just self-disclosing, but actually audited emissions data to continue to keep that lower interest rate. So it's nice to see both the private sector as well as the regulatory bodies.
Can I build on that just for a second? I'd say that, I think the progressive policy environment was a catalyst for a lot of changes, and certainty around policy really helps with adoption and change. But I do agree with my panelists that it's really market forces that have created a step change in the last few years in the way that our customers think about these opportunities, because it's no longer about checking a box or whatever. It's about building a sustainable business that can attract capital and returns value to the shareholders.
So, you mentioned Norway, Kirstie, and I think we had a discussion around some other jurisdictions. And I think you talked to many folks here locally, and in many cases, people would say our oil and gas sector is typically pursues a race to second. Someone else develop technology first, we'll come in afterwards, and we'll make it better, and we'll go from there. And that's not necessarily the case, I think, when you look at our system around climate policy and implementation of clean tech, things of that nature. I would certainly argue that we have a leading position in that in Canada. But is there anything else that you guys are seeing, lessons learned from some of these other jurisdictions, whether it's conversations with your sister company, Kirstie, or whether, Connor, it's you guys looking at deployment into other markets, or Janet, it's really understanding, what are peers doing, even though they might be OGCI signatories. They're some of the largest companies in the world and from the oil and gas sector, but they've got a methane pledge. We have a global methane pledge out there, OGMP 2.0, go down the list. There's lots happening outside of Canada as well. Any comments? Maybe Connor, let's start with you, and then Janet, if you have anything, and Kirstie from there.
Sure. I'll actually pose my answer as a challenge to the people in the audience who are part of this industry. What we've seen is, when we started the company in 2019, Canada was really on the forefront, and when we talked to people in the United States, they were like, methane what? And they talked a lot about air quality pollutants, but not a lot about methane. And in the past couple of years, that's really changed. And the one thing about the American market is they move very quickly. And so we're seeing, where a lot of our U.S. customers kind of skipped over the part where let's think about this for a while and try out some things, and they went right to let's just invest $30 million and solve this problem. And so we're seeing a lot of action in the United States. There's quite a bit of activity on the policy side too, with the EPA making a new regulation last November, and the Inflation Reduction Act this summer having a methane tax in it. So I would say that the challenge to the audience and the people in the industry is, as Canadians, we need to make sure we don't lose our leading position.
Yeah, and I just, to build on that, we're looking in the market. I think, Kirstie mentioned, the opportunity to link your loans, sustainability linked loans to methane targets. But overall, again, our vision and what, Pat Carlson is our CEO. He's been the founder of many companies in the Calgary community, and he always seems to see where the puck is going. He has this gift. And, he's very passionate about addressing climate change. And, as a chemical engineer, he's just looking at it quite simply about what methane does to the environment, and that every time, every minute, every year that we continue to emit methane, that's just more we need to do later in terms of actually getting those greenhouse gases out of our atmosphere. So we are, purpose-built to drive towards net zero and net negative, I know from an accounting perspective. But really, that's really, in some ways, not Pat's vision. Pat envisions us being just negative or neutral, that we don't have any emissions. And it's plugging all the holes, it's electrifying our upstream, and getting into these downstream markets where we actually are having ways that we can eliminate, Scope 3 emissions. So I think that vision is there, and by finding these solutions and really challenging ourselves and working with policymakers to say, hey, here's what works. Here's what's going to work in the clean fuel standard, because that's the other thing or probably the clean electricity standard. Because what we see is that natural gas has to be part of the energy solution for places like Alberta and Saskatchewan. So how can we do it, and how can we do it in the best way?
Yeah. I would echo those comments, and it's interesting in terms of a trend that's similar in Canada and the US is really this increased focus now on methane, which wasn't talked about as much. It was always CO2, and I think there's increased recognition for the fact that while methane it doesn't last in the atmosphere anywhere near as long as CO2, it packs a huge punch in the first 20 years. It's more than 80 times of a higher global warming agent than CO2. And so if we're looking at the low-hanging fruit, methane makes the most sense to attack, I guess, right off the bat, and the technologies exist for us to get there. When I look at Norway, which our sister company, the name is NEMS, they've been around for a long time as well, mostly focused on offshore. They have a completely different regulatory environment. They maybe see changes that happen every 3 years in the regulations. They're very stable. It's very predictable in terms of an environment for energy companies to actually make longer-term business plans, and whereas here in Canada, it's very dynamic and can be quite challenging in terms of the predictability, and I've heard the term political ping pong, depending on which group gets into power, and that can be quite challenging, I think, when you're an operator trying to form long-term emissions reduction policies around. So that would be an area of opportunity, I think, that we could look towards as a country, as an area of improvement.
I think what's interesting when you go out into the international landscape and talk to folks, and we've had the luxury of doing this in the Middle East and Europe and the US over the last few years, and folks that work, whether they're in government or oil and gas producers or the service companies providing services to the oil and gas sector, always kind of come over and say, hey, tell us more about what you're doing in Alberta and Canada, and tell us more about the available technologies and what the motivators are and drivers. They're doing all of this in the absence of a regulatory environment. and because there's the race now, as much as we hear about the race to net zero, I think from the oil and gas sector as a whole is really the race to be the last molecule produced on the planet, because we are talking about an energy transition, and that will take time, and we know that. But there's long-term assets in this sector, whether you're domestic or whether you're overseas. There's long-term assets, and we know that it's going to be a part of the energy mix for years to come. But there's an opportunity, I think, for everybody here and beyond, really to take the message that there's a lot of lessons to be learned, and that we shouldn't allow things to bog us down to do more. And that takes a lot of education and awareness really outside of our borders as well. So it's just kind of an observation, really, when I hear you guys talk around this. Okay, so with that said, I think what the link I was trying to make there is that you hear a lot right now about differentiated gas, responsible energy, all that kind of stuff. What's interesting to me when I look at some of these standards, or I look at the conversation that happens in this space, most often the methodologies are not specific to Canadian energy development. And it's fascinating to me, because I would suggest that we have the cleanest value chain on the planet. And so it's great that the dialogue is happening around us, but I think we need to strengthen our message around what role we play in actually defining the baseline parameters. And you guys, in every case, all three of you, I would suggest, are a significant part of that baseline discussion. So in each of your views, what can we do to ensure that we maintain this leadership position, as you guys had mentioned, and really what's next on the path to net zero? And so a big question, but I think that's what we're here for, is, this time you can kind of put on your personal hats if you want, but what's next in the path to net zero? And Janet, you've certainly alluded to the fact that we have natural gas that plays a significant role, et cetera. But is there anything else there that you want to touch on as we look forwards 28 years?
Yeah, I think we just need to, take a real hard look at the world we live in. I think we've seen, what happened in Europe with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the shock that is happening in the entire European energy system. You've got utilities that, sold electricity at low prices, and now are buying natural gas to create that electricity at very high prices, and they're going bankrupt, and windfall taxes to bail out the utilities. I think we've got to, and I, again, say this as a former political employee, but we've got to take a real hard look at our energy mix in Canada. And as I look at things like the clean electricity standard and the regulations that the government has defined, is we have to really think about the role of natural gas and how we can have natural gas use all the benefits. I was born and raised in Calgary, and I think until 2008, natural gas made up a huge amount of the royalties and taxes to the Alberta government. So I think we have to commit ourselves to this standard of excellence, but we've also got to convince others. We get in our own echo chamber, certainly not just in this town, but in this province. And we've got to find new ways. I know we've said it over and over again, but it's not just, telling people, but it's engaging them and helping them see that, Canada can be proud of what it can do, and the innovation like Connor's company has done, or that Kirstie's company is doing, that, we can be part of that system and export that. Just one final thing, prior to maybe some kind of bad behavior by people at, in positions of power, that the Alberta energy regulator was indeed exporting regulatory policy to Mexico and around the world, even working with Ukraine to try to create some regulatory regimes over there so that they could develop their oil and gas resources. So I think there are things that we can do. And the World Bank has really recognized the Canadian contribution to leadership in the methane space. So we've got to find our people, find our tribe out there, and work with them to create this as a standard around the world.
So in the what's next question for me, I'm going to maybe take a step back and talk about, the word energy transition itself. And I'll tie this all together, and I'll try not to take the next 19 minutes. So I at Westgen, we use the word energy evolution. And I just think that the word energy transition is a bit of a misnomer because it makes it sound like we're going from one thing to a different thing. And in reality, what's happening is we've got an energy mix today that has a bunch of different energy sources in different proportions, and each of those sources has its own characteristics. And by and large, that mix is what it is as a reflection of the values of society over the last 100 years and what society has asked the energy industry to do, which is, cheap, safe, abundant, and secure supplies of fuel. And I like the word energy evolution because it really, I think, is a better characterization of what's happening. And what's happening is that the needs and values of society are changing, right? And so security is still an important factor and is gaining importance more so recently. But sustainability is more important now to people than it ever has been before. And so what I see is not that we're transitioning from one thing to a different, but rather that our energy systems continue to evolve. The mix is changing and the characteristics of the sources in the mix are changing. And what my kind of message of what gets me really excited about this energy evolution for oil and gas, it's really that we've, as an industry, we've actually faced challenges like this before and made enormous progress over, in giving society what it needs over a 10-year period. And my best example is the shale gas revolution. And so if you go back to the early 2000s, people were lining up at gas stations and there was an energy shortage, and there was an energy crisis. And this industry, which is filled with entrepreneurial innovators and people who solve problems, they figured out how to create a new abundant source of energy that was low cost, and it completely changed the way that North America experiences energy. And I don't think we appreciate the benefits that came along with the shale gas revolution. And I just see that cycle happening again, and this time it's those same people, but they're saying, how are we going to get this energy system to net zero?
I love that reference to abundance too. I don't know if you guys have heard the story of aluminum, about how most abundant metal in the Earth's crust, and a while back, before electrolysis existed, only the kings would get to dine with forks that were made out of aluminum. Then the next level would be gold, and then silver. And it was because even though it was around us, it was just so expensive to actually turn into these utensils. And then when electrolysis came, a step change technology, boom, unlocked this amazing resource of aluminum to the point now we don't even think twice when we throw it out. So it is exciting when we talk about the potential for a technology to come along like the shale revolution and hydraulic fracturing or horizontal drilling and SAGD and all the innovations that have come out of the energy industry, and many from Canada. It's exciting to kind of see that potential. But my actual answer isn't actually going to be about a step change technology. It's going to be boring. It's data. So I really think that the future and the foundation that's required is solving one of our biggest problems, and that's a lack of accurate data around emissions quantification. It's one of our clients' biggest challenges. I think even to get that data on an annual basis as estimates can be quite a challenge and a cost for our operators. And so the more that we're able to build on that, and we are seeing big momentum in terms of monthly and quarterly reporting and companies making that investment, it allows for software like ours, which is layering in machine learning, to identify some of that low-hanging fruit, those outlier pieces of equipment that have high intensity of emissions, but they flew under the radar because their total emissions that they emitted were either getting lumped into greater fuel aggregates or I could go into detail on that, but I won't bore you. But essentially, with software and technology and data, we're going to be able to kind of make a lot of dense, so it isn't going to be one big technology. It's going to be many good decisions.
And, you know, I think each of you touched on over the course of the last half hour, you know, the role of innovation going forward, whether that's on data, whether that's on technology, whether that's on systems and strategy. And I'm sure many of you in the room here, whether you're in the oil and gas sector, the financial sector, innovation is a critical part. One of our good buddies over there, hey, Brian, key to the innovation ecosystem with Avatar Innovations as well. So it's happening all over the place, and it's really neat to see the type of energy that's going into it, and which includes this conference. So disruption, energy disruptors. I would like to ask each of you over the last few minutes before we'll save about 8 minutes for everybody to ask some questions, but what does disruption mean to you? Not necessarily about energy, it can be, but what does it mean? So I'll give you an example. For me, it means changed behavior and expectations. That's just a requirement for disruption. If you buy an electric vehicle, you need to change your behavior and your expectations for maybe how long it takes to do a 500-kilometer trip, for example. That's what it means to me. Change behavior, change expectations. Very high level, very broad, mostly because that's as deep as my brain goes. And you guys can probably dig much deeper. But what does disruption mean to each of you? And Kirstie, we'll start with you.
Oh, this was not provided to us ahead of time.
That was
Glad
on
you
purpose.
didn't pick me first.
Yeah, disruption is quite I guess, an abrupt, provocative word, and I think there will be innovations that are step changes. We've touched on it, but it's really going to be the accumulation of many good decisions, and it's not one silver bullet. I think when we talked about the different incentives for change, you know, it's regulators, it's the people in this room, consumers that potentially will be able to make decisions paying more for differentiated gas. It's going to be the private markets. It's going to be the shareholders of the investment groups. It's going to, I think, not be as the word disruptive. I think I don't think of it in that term. I think of it as a collective.
Connor.
I'm going to...
Wait, 2-minute limit for you, okay?
Okay, starting now? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to second that. So I don't think in this example, I don't think disruption means that, you know, something's going to come in and everything's going to be different. I think it's more, I think disruption is going to be more of people's mindsets and how we think about energy and the challenges we face. And I think there's opportunities to, you know, make small tweaks to things like our commercial models, and referencing responsibly sourced gas now, that can create enormous impacts, even though they just seem like small things, right? And so for those of you who aren't familiar with responsibly sourced gas, think of what fair trade coffee did for coffee, right? And people pay more for that because they value the nature of the supply chain for that coffee. And so, you know, I think that it's less going to be something that is just going to show up and fix all our problems, and more going to be changing the way we think about energy and our impact, and then, you know, those having snowball effects.
Well, I think, you know, you all are right. You talked about expectations, and I would say, framed in a different way, maybe it's the vision of, you know, that we can, maybe even 5 years ago, we couldn't see ourselves on a way to 45% or 75% methane emissions reductions. We would have thought that was an impossible goal. You know, the capital's not there, all these different arguments about why it just can't be done. The technology's not there, the data's not there, et cetera. But I think now that we've, you know, made those incremental steps, we can actually now see the art of the possible. And really the art of the possible is to have zero emissions energy from methane. And, you know, it's a matter of just kind of thinking through what that ecosystem is going to be required to help us do it.
Janet said what I was trying to say.
Yeah, exactly, yeah.
Good job, Janet.
All right. Well, you guys did a great job getting us to the time that we wanted to. So we have about 9 minutes for questions, and if not, certainly I'll come up with a few more. But would love to hear from folks. If you'd like, state your name and affiliation and what disruption means to you, and then you can ask a question after that.
Way to make nobody ask questions, Jackson.
Patrick with 360 Energy Liability Management. That's a mouthful, but disruption. I just probably disrupted your conference here with my questions, so I'll leave it at that. I'm not going to do a 2-minute speech on it, but my question would be on the RSG front, when you sort of quantify the responsibly sourced gas, when it reaches the facility, how do they differentiate between it if it's commingled in a pipeline? And then my second question attached to that would be, like my preliminary reading on it was Europe was driving a lot of the need for RSG, and they were the biggest proponents behind why we wanted to sort of indicate that we were doing RSG. With the obvious geopolitical tensions over there, will RSG sort of fade into the background here, or will there still be a stress internally for responsibly sourced gas?
I could jump and take a shot at that one first. To answer the first question about the mechanism of the physical molecules, it's very similar to gas trading itself, where a trader can buy gas in one physical location and sell it in another, and it doesn't, the molecules don't actually, it's not the same molecule, so it's all, and so it works on that same principle. With regard to RSG, I think it's a great point about what's happening in Europe, and I certainly think some of the maybe commitments that they've made around, or ambition around the nature of the gas that they want to import is definitely going to be relaxed. I don't think that the snowball is going to stop rolling down the hill, because despite energy security becoming much more of a higher priority topic of conversation recently, I don't see climate going down, right? I think that one's coming up and the other one's staying up. And to me, that's all the more reason why, the work that Janet, for instance, is doing is so critically important, because, to address both of these challenges at the same time, climate change and energy poverty or energy security, we really have to pull these levers that we can, and there's some really meaningful levers that we can pull.
Yeah, maybe I'd just jump in. I think it's a great question. It's fascinating how they ascribe these environmental attributes to gas. Essentially, it's like creating a twin, and that's where the data comes in and is super important. A digital twin of your natural gas. So that environmental attribute is just that, say, Kiwetinohk produces natural gas that's X percent below the kind of baseline for the Canada benchmark or the US benchmark or whatever. We can sell that advantage through methane performance credits or something that's like a certificate we earn. But that has to be founded in good data. And if it's not, then of course, we're going to not realize the value from that trading. And certainly it's an investment, though, on the other side, for us to even set up the systems to be able to prove that we have that performance level. And then, I think the question about responsibly sourced gas is bang on. Now we're seeing countries that banned fracking and didn't look back, start to look back and go, well, how can we do this? And utilities, whether it's in Europe or even in Asia, as we look at LNG exports, are going to be looking at, where did that come from? Where are those molecules from? And if we can lead the pack, then we can realize some value. But we can also ensure that right up to, the communities of Fox Creek and others, Pouce Coupe, that, there's good jobs and employment up there for the long term.
I would echo that, especially the point on it requires systems and good data and infrastructure in place to effectively manage that environmental attribute. And quite frankly, it's just not there. But I think what's great is that it's moving forward. There's the snowball, and as a concept, it's fantastic. And as a consumer, I would love that option to trust that I can spend more money or I have choice and can speak with my dollars on that. I think it's a great concept, but the devil's in the details, and there's a lot to work out, even just the methodologies that these groups are using or proposing to use, and then the auditability. So there's a bit of buyer beware, and just in terms of educating consumers and educating those that are acting on behalf of consumers or setting this up, to really ask those questions about, is this audited? What methodology are you using? Is it all just based on engineering estimates, and where did those come from? There's a huge list of questions to be figured out, but that we shouldn't let that stop us from moving in that direction, because we are figuring things out as we're going to.
It is one really cool thing about where, the voluntary side of the credit market and things is moving is the data, because, you've got these huge buyers of like Shopify, Amazon, Microsoft, and they're all looking for these voluntary credits. But the amount of money they'll give you, the value of that credit is really based on your data and your ability to show verified emissions reductions, that is an additionality to what business as usual would provide.
Great question. Maybe as the microphone's coming up, last thing I'll add on that is what is great about RSG really is it's creating a better environment for understanding value chain, life cycle analysis, life cycle impacts, and scope 3 emissions. So it's creating a broader awareness around impacts, which I think is very positive.
Maggie Hanna from Energy Futures Lab. I'm a fellow there. And, fellow, but disruption for me means that everything behind the switch changes, but there's no disruption to energy supply to the consumer. And goes, not just net zero, but net negative, in my ideal world. And so my question really is around legacy wells and infrastructure. And, we have satellite data now, more than 3 satellites running around the world measuring methane emissions, and it's getting more granular all the time, well by well by well. And so any ideas on how we're going to tackle the legacy wells and infrastructure that maybe doesn't have companies behind it that has this kind of vision or this kind of capital?
That's a great question, a very tough question. The legacy of abandoned wells, I think, Alberta's pretty good in terms of leadership with the Orphan Well Fund. But, we still have, assets out there as we have consolidated these 2 companies. To be honest, there's times when we're doing our ARO program and planning, our major spend. But, one thing that Pat has formulated and might be an idea to think about, Maggie, is this kind of pension plan for wells that, rather than think about liability management at the end of a life cycle, how do you look across the life cycle, kind of like for us, hopefully we're all contributing to a pension every month in our working and active years so that one day we can retire. And maybe should have a requirement for companies to do that. And how do you enforce that? And what is I think the AER, the Alberta Energy Regulator, is doing a good job of working away from the liability management ratio to more of a scorecard, but it's still pretty kind of loosey-goosey, and maybe there's some more things that could be done. And then, what we're finding is, even though we're trying to be very progressive in this space, is there's not a lot of recognition or, points given. Most ESG investors, you have to explain orphan wells to them. They just don't understand what it is.
Can we go longer to the organizing folks? 5. Sorry, did I hear 10? Did I hear 10? No? Okay. Well, I hope we have another question. We've got 5 more minutes to burn.
Hi there, my name is Sean Ovenden. I'm with a system integrator called Avanad. And my definition of disruption would be there's got to be a degree of uncomfort associated with disruption. It can't be clean and easy. There's got to be something awkward about it. And my question to everybody on the panel is, do you think that we can achieve, and let's limit it to Canada, true net zero, at least in the production of our hydrocarbon cycle? So obviously not the consumption and downstream, but do you think we can really get there?
I'll start. I think yes. And if I could redo my disruption answer, I might say that, my goal is to aim to disrupt some mindsets so that people believe this is possible. And the reason I say yes is because I don't think it's actually a physics challenge, right? We're not trying to solve for cold fusion. It's an economics challenge. So a lot of the sources of emissions, there are solutions, and in the past they haven't been part of the way we've done business, but that's been a reflection of the value placed on low cost energy. So I think it's more of an economics challenge than a physics challenge. And I take the example of methane leaks, which are a big problem today. We also have a thing called sour gas in the oil and gas industry. It's H2S, and if it leaks, then people could die. And guess what? We don't leak it. We figured out how to not leak that, right? Because we care about that. So I think that a lot of these sources of emissions are solvable, and it's just about our willingness to invest in doing it and whether the economics are going to go around.
Great question, thank you. Maybe one more question. It's coming.
Hi, thanks. I cannot agree more that it's an economic challenge, but to solve an economic challenge, you need a lot of leadership, a new type of leadership. So my question is, in your view, what type of leadership you need to solve this challenge and to arrive like H2S, we don't emit it, and that's it?
Yeah, I'll take a swing at that one, and thanks for that. That's a great question, because I think that's at the heart of it, is the leadership and the vision. So what type of leadership do you need? I think, the teacher comes when the student is ready, perhaps. At some point, I think we're seeing great leaders like the people up on the stage here with me, who are running their own companies, doing their own pieces to contribute to it. But we also need brave political leadership. We need people who are willing to break the mold from a party line to actually present a very values-based argument to address climate change, while being, say, fiscally responsible and doing all these other things. We also need corporate leadership that's going to drive to the next level, the technocratic leadership and just sort of pleasing investors and returning money to shareholders or doing share buybacks is good. You have to maintain, your share price, but at a certain point, I think we need to see companies taking responsibility and presenting a vision on how they're going to manage the waste and the carbon emissions from their business, and not just thinking that, like the orphan well example, that they're going to dump that all on us as taxpayers, that we're all going to fund direct air capture or carbon capture and storage or all these other solutions. There has to be some kind of way of sharing that, and I think that's the leadership we need, the ownership and accountability.
Very quickly, I agree with Janet, and I think that there needs to be kind of a political or a vocal leadership in the region that brings people together around a vision, because I think that vision has a lot of power to incentivize and influence people around their behaviors. And then I think it takes innovators like the people in this room who are here connecting the dots and bringing together people with different sets of expertise around, the facilities. What are the natures of the facilities and the actual technical, nature of the leaks? What is the nature of the carbon policy environment, and what are some of the levers that could be pulled there? What's the nature of the market, and what does the market want, and how could we create systems to bring market signals and enable investments like RSG, where we create a return on an investment. So I think that it takes the vision, which is a big leadership, and hopefully we can get a leader that unites us around that. And then it takes the integration and the people who are experts in the things to come together and figure out how to make those systems work.
Kirstie, parting thoughts.
Yeah. I would say, too, part of the leadership is an acknowledgement that when we look at methane emitted from human activity, and really it splits, the top industries are agriculture and oil and gas. When you look at agriculture, there's still technological challenges to addressing the methane emitted there. But when you look at the methane emitted in oil and gas, all the technology already exists to eliminate it. Which is exciting. And actually, when you dive into the economics of it, at least half in some reports, people are proposing that you can actually address that and eliminate the methane either at cost or for profit, especially as the carbon tax increases. So it really feels like a no-brainer. It's low-hanging fruit, and for us to reach these climate goals as a global community, I think it's a recognition that this is low-hanging fruit. The technology exists. Let's go act on it. Let's go do it.
Well, thanks. And so I would say each of you are courageous and optimistic and collaborative leaders, and that would be my answer to your question. Ladies and gentlemen, please, this is just an exceptional group right here. Thank you very much, you guys.